Excited. We're going to go ahead and get started. We got a lot to cover. For those of you who haven't been on webinars before, I'm going to do a little housekeeping, but this is our client retention strategies for MSPs and IT companies webinar. We do once a month webinars just on topics that are hot topics for managed services providers and IT companies. I'm thrilled today to have, I would say, a business mentor, a friend, a former boss, and someone who I think very highly of, Gary Watts from Fuse.Cloud, the CEO of Fuse.Cloud. He's going to talk a little bit about his experience and kind of what led him to start his business. And then we're going to really dig deep today into client retention strategies. And when I say client retention, I don't only mean keeping a client. I mean, really creating advocates out of your clients, keeping them loyal, making sure that they're not price shopping or looking for a better deal somewhere else, but really focusing on what we have come up with as those top 6 things that are critical to be able to treat customers like they are kings and queens and really do this in a way that keeps clients longer. The reason I chose Gary for this webinar, I'm going to do a formal slide on Gary, but the reason I chose Gary is because he's nearing 20 years. He's about 18, 19 years as the founder and CEO of Fuse.Cloud. Of course, he was in telecommunications before that, entrepreneurship. He can talk about that a little bit, but he is one of the best that I've ever really seen at retaining clients for long-term contracts. I believe, if I'm not mistaken, Gary, you have clients that were with you like day one. Is that correct? And you're almost 20 years in.
That is still correct, yes.
Okay. So that's pretty amazing. I think we can all learn regardless of what industry we're in. And one of the things that after working with Gary for 8 or 9 years, and then still today, he has really mastered the art of focusing on relationships as a key core value of his business. And then also from the numbers standpoint, industry average in this industry is about 2%. Churn rate. Gary has maintained specifically over the last decade, which we all know has been tough to say this, so Gary really should be awarded today, but has maintained under a 5% churn rate in the last decade. So that's really something that I think we can all congratulate him on. And I really want to share, Gary, as we start out, and for those of you who don't know, I'm Laura Johns, founder and CEO of the Business Growers. We're a marketing agency that serves managed services providers and IT companies. I really love, Gary, for you just to share your story. Let's talk about, how you got to start Fuse.Cloud and then your path to becoming the company that you are and the services that you offer. If you don't mind, just kind of giving us the lay of the land so that we can know kind of your area of expertise as we get into this.
Okay. Thanks, Laura, for inviting me. I appreciate the opportunity to share, and I hope it's useful for some of you that are on. But I kind of began my career as an entrepreneur after college. I ended up buying and owning and operating a Dairy Queen franchise. So I spent the first 10 years of my business life owning and operating a restaurant, which probably helped me understand, how important customer relationship was, because in that industry, if you can't take care of the customer,
Right.
then you don't have any business. So
Right.
so I did that the first 10 years of my life, learned a lot. I kind of count that as my master's degree or doctorate degree in business because I was so young. I started at 23. So about 32, I got out of the restaurant business, went to work for a telecom provider that was in the late 90s, beginning to try and assimilate products together to sell to business. Back in the 90s, and I'm probably the oldest one on the webinar.
I don't know about that.
Well,
We won't ask, but
yeah, back in the 90s, you get a bill for your phone service, you get a bill for your dial-up internet, you get a bill for your pager, you get a bill for your cell phone. And so businesses had to try and figure that out. So our company kind of built a billing platform and became wholesale providers of a lot of those services and kind of combined them together. And I just started as a salesperson there, coming out of the restaurant business, and ended up running their sales organization. Stayed there about 8 or 9 years. But one thing that I learned from that experience was what products were coming down the hatch, what was next. And what was next, in my opinion, was voice over IP about 2005. We were trying to develop that product. Had some differences of opinion with some people on the operational side of that business on how to do that. So I raised some money, and in 2006 we started what is now called Fuse.Cloud, and we were the first voice over IP provider in a hosted way in Mississippi. And since we've kind of grown and added products as they become available.
So tell us specifically what your offering is to your customers today.
Today we have three main product lines. One would be voice over IP, and that would be sold in a variety of different ways. We've got a hosted platform that is our product that we sell, and we build the functions and features and package it and sell it to the customer. The second product we sell is internet access, whether that be fiber or it could be some type of virtual network that we kind of construct for the customer, virtual private network. Or we also sell some, wireless options for backup and things like that. Along with that kind of internet access, we've got kind of a new fleet product that we're starting to sell to a lot of companies that have, a fleet of trucks and things that they can kind of keep up with. And then the most exciting product that we launched about 2018, that's the fastest growing product we have, is our managed services product, where we are proactively putting a package together for small and medium-sized business. We become their IT company, and we charge a flat rate per head count for all of their licensing and unlimited support for their product. And so that is the product that we're the most excited about these days, and we're seeing the most growth from.
Love it. All right. So we're going to get into these strategies that we've talked about. Like I mentioned, Gary and I worked together for quite some time. So we've collaboratively decided what we think the 6 top elements. We're calling them the big 6 today. But first, I want to ask those that they're in here on the chat, if you can just put in how long you've been in business. That would really help us kind of understand. This is not meant to be just, Gary talking. This is certainly meant to be interactive. We will stop for questions. Everyone's muted, but if you do have a question, feel free anytime between the stops to ask. I'd love to know, just throw in the chat real quick, how long you've been in business so that we can kind of understand. I know Gary's coming on 20 years. Some of you may have different stages of business, and that certainly matters, especially when we get to what we're going to talk about, which is people. We know we can't just hire for every position from a retention standpoint that we need. So we're going to, speak about at different stages in the business, how you could potentially accommodate getting the right people to help with retaining your clients. So if you can just put in the chat how long you've been in business. We got somebody put in there. All right, Greg, 30+ years. That's awesome.
I might not be the oldest person.
I was going to say, you might have a thing to teach us, Greg. We'll see in just a minute. Okay, so before we go to the next slide, I would love for you to also throw in the chat what reasons you think customers leave an MSP or IT company. I want to hear what y'all think the top, because I have a list, and ConnectWise gave us a stat, so I'm going to throw up what ConnectWise says, but I want to see why you guys think perceived indifference. Yes, that's a good one. I know that's a lot of, customer service, too expensive, poor customer service. See a lot of that. Okay, so here's what we have come up with. According to ConnectWise, it is mismanaged expectations. Not surprising. The good thing is that I believe, here's some other reasons. A lot of those you're putting in the chat. I want to look at some more. I see a couple of others. Lose touch with customer service, misalignment. So mismanaged expectations, we're going to talk about, because that's something that, in my opinion, can most certainly be managed if you learn how to manage. It's not technical issues. And what's interesting here is that I would say, for the most part, we see poor communication, security and compliance for some, transparency, poor service quality, SLA breach, price. I would say, Gary, you can tell me about what you've experienced, but I would say price may not, a lot of times price comes to mind in other industries, but I don't know in this industry if that's usually the case. I believe that ConnectWise is probably right on when they say mismanaged expectations, because that includes communication, transparency, et cetera.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with that. I think price is more important on the front end of the sale than it is on the back end of the
Yeah.
retention.
Yeah. Totally agree. All right. So first, before we talk about retention, we've got to be realistic about what retention and churn really look like and how we're going to even measure it in the first place. I like this quote from Peter Drucker. He was considered the father of modern business management, but he says you can't manage what you don't measure. And so here, I just want to kind of walk through a couple things I know that Fuse.Cloud uses to measure. I think that oftentimes, depending on the stage of your business and how long you've been in business, churn can feel like a gut punch a lot of times because we're not prepared for it. And typically we're not prepared for it because we're not measuring it or think about it. I think about two things: lead metrics and lag metrics. My team and I talk about this pretty often, but we want to be sure we're not only looking at metrics that are behind us, because that really doesn't protect us from churn. So we want to make sure that we're thinking of lead metrics to think about future performance so that we can predict and make predictions. That's things like, and we'll look here. These aren't necessarily lead or lag. These are all lag actually right here, but these are core metrics that I know Gary at Fuse.Cloud and his team are looking at on a weekly basis. We'll go ahead and mute. Hang on, we got somebody joining. We want to make sure we mute. Grace, you got them. All right, let's see. If you can, just mute yourself as you join, please. Okay. These are metrics that Gary and his team are looking at on a weekly basis, but we also want to look at, so churn rate, obviously we mentioned under 2% is that industry standard. Gary and his company is at about that 0.5%, which is why he's on the call today. Customer lifetime value, NPS score, good for MSPs is typically 30 to 70. CSAT score, goals above 90 there. And here are just some other metrics that a lot of you may not necessarily be looking at, that I think are also, some here are what I call lead metrics, things like feature adoption rate, your daily, weekly, monthly active users, if you can look at that. But all of these things are really great metrics to also keep in place. Maybe it's not at the top management meeting, but maybe it's in a daily stand-up with your team. But we want to be looking at things like time to resolution, expansion of different services, and how much every month we're adding to current customers, additional services, customer health score, retention rate, reactivation rate, who's coming back from bad experiences and why, customer acquisition cost, feature adoption rates, and then renewal rates. So these are some more KPIs and metrics that we can look at.
Hey, Laura.
Yeah.
Back up one more slide. Let's talk about this real quick.
Yeah. This
one
next one right here.
Okay, yeah. Does everybody on the call understand what the NPS score is and how it's generated?
Give us a thumbs up in the chat if you know NPS, thumbs down if you don't, and then we can.
Because I think if you've not done this, I think it's something that's absolutely very helpful.
Yeah.
In talking about retention.
Yeah. Well, go ahead and talk about it a little bit and how you've used it.
Okay. Well, what an NPS score is basically is you ask one question to your customer base, and that question is, I guess you could ask.
Would you recommend us? Would you refer us to?
That's right. Would you refer us to someone else to be your provider? Mm-hmm. And if they answer 9 or 10, it's a positive. Yeah. They answer anything between 6, 7, and 8.
Neutral.
It's a neutral. And some people say just 7 and 8, but some people include 6. And then anything 5 or below is a negative score. You add all that up and you either come up with a negative number, 0, or a positive number. And so what you want to do is you want to be over that 0 number. And it depends on what industry you're in. And if you're in a commercial industry versus a consumer industry, then, the acceptable rates are different. But we feel like that's very important to get an understanding of kind of where we are from a customer.
Right. And we do it twice a year. That's kind of the standard and what we recommend. And, don't do it after you give everybody a 10% discount on their bill. That's not the time to do it. You want to make sure you're doing it in a very neutral setting, neutral time frame. So, All right, so we're gonna, now, I know I keep teasing the big six, but I want to know on a scale of 1 to 10 now in the chat, how well do you think you are at doing retention? And when I say doing retention, I don't mean having conversations after the customers indicated they're leaving. I mean, how well are you doing retention in all parts of your business on a daily basis? I love this quote. We start the retention process when the person is still open to staying and not after they've already told you they're leaving. I think that that's the worst position to put ourselves in whenever we already know that they're willing to leave. So give us in the chat, 1 to 10, how good you think your company's doing on retention. And maybe you're here today because you know it's not a great score, but I'd really be interested in kind of hearing what folks on the call have to say. All right, we're gonna move on to the big six. I see an 8. Come on, folks, rate yourself. Some need to learn more. All right. Well, I want to hear what folks have to say. So here's what we call the big six. We got somebody that says, let's go. All right. The big six. I don't know if y'all are watching this as us. Probably not. If your wives probably are, if you're a gentleman on the call, this is us as a show. They have the big three. So I made this the big six. But so here's what Gary and I have decided are the 6 most critical things to focus on to keep clients happy or longer. We're going to go in depth on each of the 6 and just provide 3 quick musts and some examples on how Gary has kept his clients going on for 18 plus years. And we're going to start with sales. A lot of people like to separate sales and retention. But the truth is, sales is what gets the customer in the first place. And Gary and I both are aligned. It takes a great customer experience from the very beginning. Very early in the relationship. So Gary, kind of speak to what we had talked about in terms of what you feel like critical, those critical things are when you're starting with sales in long-term relationship building, trust building, things like that.
Well, I think that, even at the front of the process with a relationship with the customer, the more knowledge you can explain to the customer that you have, the better it's going to help on the back end when you start retention. Our approach is we try and keep our sales team with good product knowledge and understanding. However, as most people I would think would agree with me on the call, that you're going to have more churn on your sales team than any other part of your organization. Because it's just a fact. I mean, you're going to get some people in there, they might sell who their relationships are, then they're not they're not as successful as they want to be. They'll find another job, you have to lay them off, whatever. So we've kind of taken the approach of give them a good product understanding, but then bring in technical expertise from sales engineering type position to really, be that person that can answer the technical questions of what you want to do. And it depends on the customer and the size of the customer and those type things. But letting the customer know you kind of know what you're talking about makes a big difference, I think, on the retention side, because there's going to have to be things after the sale that's got to be tweaked, and we try and work through problems when there's a misunderstanding with what the customer sells versus what we actually can provide, and those. So we're always talking about those type things. But I think having a technical expert available, and depending on the size of your company, it could be the owner of the company, it could be somebody on the operations side, it could be somebody that actually makes it work also has to help sell it. But I think a sales engineering approach is really, really helpful, showing the customer that you've got the knowledge to continue to provide for them.
Right. And in some positions, it could be a salesperson who just happens to have that knowledge, or you have that sales engineer role if you're big enough to have that, and sometimes if you're small enough, it's the CEO that's the sales engineer, maybe that if they understand technical knowledge. But I think, like you mentioned, just somebody who can help. I think that you have to have a level of technical knowledge in the sale to do proper expectation setting, because a lot of times someone who's not technically savvy on your product may or may not know what they can and can't commit to during the sales process, right? You don't want to have to keep going back and forth during the sales process to figure it out. So I feel like, a lot of times too, we don't want to, the worst thing we can do is have a salesperson who overpromises, because then you're setting that standard of overpromise, under deliver from the get-go, which can be really really dangerous.
And,
And
and
then,
there's always going to be a healthy tension between sales and operations.
right,
So
of
I'm not
course.
saying let's remove the tension because I think the tension can be good. I'm
Yeah,
just saying that if you bring a sales engineer in, that can be helpful with the customer on the front end saying, yeah, these people really do know what they're talking about.
right. And I think it's really common for us to consider a sales process as getting the sale and then handing it off. That handoff is really important. Also, that anecdotal information that salesperson gets throughout the sales process, that needs to be going and carrying throughout the relationship, whether it's favorite food, gift card, ideas. I know that might seem, um, you know, like small things, but once it gets handed off, if that salesperson doesn't communicate that, that's really how you can continue to win in the small ways with a customer. So, formalizing even something as small as, hey, once we get some of these anecdotal informations, maybe it's we ask them their favorite food, we ask their spouse's name, and then you're able to send them a gift certificate and handwrite with the spouse's name in there or something like that. So that information throughout the sales process is very important in the rest of the relationship of the customer. And we don't necessarily need that cutoff to be a cutoff where there's no trade of information, obviously. So, I also think sales is a good place to introduce the key players. I know that in Fuse.Cloud, for example, who are some of those people that they're going to see as soon as the sale is done, right? You
Well,
got Walter,
question.
yeah. So being able to have that salesperson communicate to the person they're selling to expectations of who they're going to see along the way, I think kind of helps them feel like family from the get-go.
Right. And with our product mix, we'll explain to them that not only will you be introduced to a customer success manager, which we'll be talking about later, but also a project manager that will help
Right.
hold your hand through the process, communicate with you to let you know what the expectation should be as far as when people come and those type things.
Right. So key takeaway here is don't separate sales and retention. Keeping someone technical in the sales process helps eliminate that misaligned expectations that we know is one of the biggest reasons people leave. Make sure that handoff is seamless and that information that we've gathered during the sales process gets carried throughout. And make sure we're selling the customer what they really need, because that's also where you got expectations and misalignment from the get-go. All right. I want another 1 to 10 in the chat. How many would say, on a scale of 1 being the worst, 10 being the best, our onboarding process is dialed in? 100% dialed in. Let us know. Is your onboarding process dialed in? 1 if no, 10 if yes. You feel great about it? Let's see what folks are giving us. 10. All right. Got some experts. We're going to let y'all talk. 8, 5. Getting there. All right. It's always a work in progress. I know we're going to talk specifically about that second pillar of the big 6, which is the onboarding experience. Gary, the things that we kind of decided on, we don't want to fill up the slides with what we think is important, but the most important, every retention focused onboarding experience, you've got those clear SOPs and accountability, got a roadmap with frequent communication and that solid tracking software. Gary, talk about, onboarding and how important it is to how the customer feels from the get-go, and kind of what your thoughts are in terms of, priorities for onboarding.
Well, it's really their first, glimpse at the company. So it's really important because people make decisions pretty quickly after, they have some kind of experience with you. One thing that I feel like that has helped us is, and we try and look at this process as, every so often, annually, for sure, but just going through just the steps in acquiring a customer and delivering the product, and putting it on some software so we can say, okay, this is what happens. Then when the signature happens, and we build the sales process up to the signature.
Right.
When we talk about the project management of it, and we build the process up until the delivery of the product, and then we talk about the after care of that product, and we build that process up. So if you don't have a clear understanding of every step in the customer acquisition process and delivery of the product, I would suggest that you get together with your team and kind of put that on paper, because as you grow, you're going to have people that have different understandings of what's important in that process.
Right.
Unless people get in a room and talk about it and you decide what the team thinks it's important, then one of your project managers might not think something is as important as one of your aftercare people. So it's
Right.
important to kind of look at that at least on an annual basis and have that in place.
Yeah. I love that. And I've got a little, you mentioned like, kind of mapping out those milestones. I have a little sample. I didn't grab yours, Gary, but I grabbed mine. So just a little sample of what we show our clients on during onboarding so they get a really good visual picture of what's actually happening for 12 months. So I love, but I also think it's important and not to, I think the obviously SOPs, the technical part of it, making sure your whole team has input, critical. And I also think this is what the customer facing roadmap looks like. What does our internal roadmap look like from a standpoint of connecting them to our culture and continuing to build trust? That means things like sending swag at month, whatever, or, remembering, client anniversary, or, some of these little, like I said, I mentioned the sales process, it's those anecdotal things, but I think you can really do a lot with onboarding and giving them a good experience, even if it's, not in the initial first 2 weeks, but kind of the onboarding team has a roadmap for success for, however long the contract is really. All right. Gary has a very, in my opinion, interesting approach on why he started Fuse.Cloud in terms of being relational with the customer because of what you were seeing in the industry. Can you kind of speak to that a little bit? Because I think human interaction is something. Joey Coleman, my whole team is reading a book. I actually have it right here. My whole team is reading this book right now, Never Lose a Customer Again by Joey Coleman. And I feel like sometimes when we, and especially in technology, we kind of get into a place where we get caught up in the processes and the sale and we forget about the people. So Gary, kind of talk about you transitioning into starting the business and what your vision was, because it's also become your core value, really.
Well, I think that in my previous employment before I started the company, I experienced a lot of larger telecom companies like the AT&Ts of the world now. And not only from dealing with customers trying to sell them a product against those companies, but we were a wholesale provider, so therefore I had to deal with those companies from a relation. I was their customer too, and so it was just very frustrating during that time frame because people had just walked away from the customer in the telecom industry. There'd been big roll ups. Even though they had 1996 in the Telecom Act, there were a lot of new competitive local exchange carriers that came out. They were so big, so fast that they just assumed, people would pay their phone bill and there wouldn't be a lot of competition. So that's the experience I had. So, knowing that, we're all made to thrive when we have sincere relationship with other people and connection with other people. I felt like if we weren't AT&T, we actually had people that would develop relationships with customers, we had a better chance of keeping that customer for a long period of time.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of the foundation of why I started the company. That and big companies like AT&T cannot react to new products as quickly as smaller boutique type companies can. And so we were able to react as we added products and those type things. But I think that businesses are not much different than individuals. They are looking to have significant relationship with other people, and their vendor is a prime opportunity to do that.
Yeah. And one thing that you've done, Gary, I didn't put a slide on it, but I want to, recognize it because I think it's important. And you've said this before, that you never want to be so big that someone couldn't call you personally if they had a big enough problem. And you've implemented internally and your customers all know about your escalation list. So Gary gives every customer of Fuse.Cloud or every client of his an escalation list that shows them exactly who they call in what order if they're having an issue. And Gary's cell phone number is at the top. I mean, the last call for sure. So not everybody wants to build a business that way, and I understand it, but I do think that that is what makes you unique, because at the end of the day, we all know technology is going to we're gonna have issues and challenges with technology, and I think it's all about the people and the way that we're handling it. Right? I actually shared Greg's on this call. I believe it was with you, Greg, a couple weeks ago, but I'm not positive that this was Comcast. I think I don't know exactly who it was, but I know that there are big telecom companies who have in the past, probably present day, incentivized by how quickly they can get people off the phone. And, to me, depending on your preference for how you want to grow and scale your business, I think this kind of mantra of it all boils down to humans dealing with humans is really critical, and maybe the best piece of all when it comes to retaining a customer, because everybody wants to feel like they're taken care of. Highly recommend that book, by the way, Never Lose a Customer Again. So we're going to talk about the people. This will vary largely based on the size of your business. But at one point or another, Gary's had all of these different roles in his business. And so, Gary, can you just kind of take us through the function and the difference between what some of these roles are and what they do, and so that folks, and again, I know not everybody on the call is got a big enough business where they can have 6 people all dedicated to client retention, but I think all of these roles are great and could be combined if you needed them to be, right, Gary?
Right. I feel like we certainly hadn't had individuals in every one of these roles for the whole 18 years. But, we talked a little bit about the sales process. And, when you look at a salesperson, it's important for us that we identify people that want to be hunters, want to go
Right.
after the logo.
Right.
Um, we're not a company that is going to hand you a list of people that are already customers, and your primary role is just to kind of farm those customers. We're looking for hunters. So that's really who we consider a salesperson. And then we've already discussed the sales engineering role, and that could be that at times has been an individual that was a full-time position. It has at times been an operation person. Right now, we're kind of, because we have 3 different products, we're utilizing different people on the operation team for those products that manage that particular product.
Right.
It seems to work well because some of our operations people enjoy getting out and seeing the customer. And I think that's a really healthy thing to do. So we don't have like somebody that's just a sales engineer and that's separate from the operations team. But we do have sales engineers that get involved with sales over a certain size. And then when you talk about a project manager, we've got a whole project management team that handles it, divided by what product we're selling the customer. And so if we sell the customer both the internet and phone at the same time, they might be dealing with a couple of different product engineer because they're specialists in that one product.
Yeah.
Same thing with IT. We've got different people for each product. The client success manager is a role that we feel that's important. And now we've got three in our company. We're about a 35 employee company, and we've got 3 or 10% of our staff dedicated to this, which I think is the key to this whole topic we're talking about, retention.
Mm-hmm.
And those people are responsible for farming those customers for additional products, as well as renewing those customers when contracts come up. And they also do some advocacy in that their goal is to touch those customers in between. So we feel like it's important not to just always go see a customer when you're trying to sell them something.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
that these client success managers are available for those customers when they might have hit a problem or snag with our customer service group. They're certainly welcome to call their client success manager, say, "Hey, I'm having this issue. Would you help me work through it?" And then this client success manager will work with our technical support team to make sure that those problems are being resolved. We don't see that a lot because I think our customer support group is really doing a fabulous job of taking care of that. But occasionally you'll do that.
Yeah.
we at times, and right now we've kind of combined it with client success, but we've also had an advocacy person, and all they do is just see 60 to 90 customers a month, whether mostly in person.
Yeah.
Might take them something, might just say, hey, how you doing? And this
Yeah.
gives us mainly an objective opportunity to get customers to say, hey, we're having problems with this. So us
Yeah.
being proactive in that way, I think, has helped with our retention. And then,
Yeah.
of course, the customer support team that our operations guys do a tremendous job managing and taking care of the customers that we have.
Yeah. And I think what's important to note here is that now this is, of course, like ideal scenario, but what we're seeing here is that, we know that in everyone's business, they're going to see sales or CEO that's selling or someone that's selling them. And we know they're going to call support, but we've got 4 different points in between, right? And so I think it's important when we think about retention and keeping the client longer, the customer support team has a tremendous, obviously, a tremendous job to do in terms of resolving issues. But there's a lot more than just a technical issue, as we saw in that reasons people leave list. There's a lot more going on. And we've got a lot of different points that in an ideal scenario, if you could get a couple of extra layers between the customer and support for making those notes in the CRM that you have, making sure that we understand if they've expressed concern about anything in the past, that we're circling back on it before it does escalate. There's just a lot of other functions that you can put in between to help resolve emergencies before they even happen. So, all right. This is, I believe, number 5, I think, but I don't feel like any good presentation from 2 Mississippians would be complete without a quote from Mark Twain. Gary's a big reader and a big reader of the classics, so he's probably got some of these Mark Twain quotes memorized. But if you are on this call and you know any other Mississippi artist, or not artist, author, excuse me, I want to know, so put it in the chat. Does anybody have, Gary, you can't do this, you can't cheat because I know you know them all. If you're aware of any other Mississippi author other than Mark Twain, I wish I had a prize to give. I should probably be giving prizes. All right. You don't have to spell it correctly. All right. Come on, somebody not from Mississippi. I want to make sure we see, just so everybody knows, we've got John Grisham and Eudora Welty and lots of good ones here. We're kind of known for our writers. William Faulkner. There we go. There's
the best one.
Some non-Mississippians give it. All right. Okay, so we've talked about people. Now we're going to talk about processes. We already mentioned this in onboarding. Obviously, SOPs are critical. Accountability for those SOPs, but I do feel like this is actually for the owner, operator of the business. This is probably the most time consuming, and so it probably gets pushed. If I had to guess, Gary, I don't know how long it took you to get SOPs in place, but I think this is probably what gets pushed to the back. And if we shifted our mindset to realize, hey, processes is actually what's going to save us time and save us money. But we talked about, from a process standpoint, having clear SOPs is number 1, keeping those team members accountable, and then making sure when something is off or on track. And, Gary, you've always been really in tune with the profitability of your clients and kind of understanding that. I think that if we look at processes as just a way to make sure we're doing things right, we're looking at it wrong, because it really is a way for you to tell when profitability is off, to understand the why.
Well, and I think too, with standard operating procedures, what might be helpful is, and we've done this a couple of times, and it costs some money, so you got to invest in it. But getting an outside objective person that deals with processes, that have more experience than you do, to come in and do some consulting with you, they probably will unveil some things you hadn't thought about, because you're so close to the business. And at the same time, whatever you pay them for that, you probably
Yeah,
will, because you probably reduce your staff because they'll see some dead time that you've got, and you can probably can combine some things. So
yeah,
that, that'd be my comment on
that's
processes,
good.
is to get somebody that's not really close to it involved in the process to help you with some things
Yeah.
you probably haven't thought about.
And I think from a retention standpoint too, you could do this with onboarding, you can do this with just experience in general. But Gary, I know you've hosted some client focus groups too, where you brought customers in and not always the happiest customers, kind of a good assortment of the people that are your advocates and maybe some that you've never heard from in a while. But getting those people in a room too and say, hey, tell us about your experience. Have you, any hiccups, or because that can really, having an open ear to that, I think can really help you with kind of streamlining those processes too.
But like I said earlier, I think too many times we feel like what's important to us is what's important to everybody.
Yes.
Sometimes doing that focus group will let you understand,
Open
well,
your eyes.
because it's important to me doesn't mean it's important to them.
Right.
Just
And
because it's not important to me doesn't mean it's not important to them.
right.
So
And at 35 employees, I think, you started with one or two, and, I think as owner, CEO, you can get a little bit further away from that reality of what's, like you just said, that what's important to you can change and not be, um, as aligned with what your customer's actually thinking. So I think that's great. Focus groups on customers. And how often, Gary, do you recommend evaluating those SOPs and making sure that they are
I think, a year is I think 6 months would be awesome, but I think more attainable every and
realistically?
to look at that
Yeah,
and get it in your routine, whether that be the fourth quarter of every year. So
yeah,
you have time to get them in place for January, or whatever works best for your
yeah.
as a
I,
company.
I think that's good. And when you're doing that annual review, I think it helps with the mindset shift. Don't think about it as just putting your processes on paper. Think about it as, hey, we're uncovering inefficiencies this way. We're streamlining our team. We're figuring out what tech stack we need, what's going to be the most impactful to the client, all of that. So it's not just process for sake of process. It's process for sake of profitability. So that's really important. Okay, we're going to move on. This is just a quick demonstration of our internal ClickUp is kind of our internal process management. What we're doing, we say if it's not in ClickUp, it doesn't exist. But one of the things I want to draw attention to here is that the people on my team know based on just a color of what they have going on, whether or not something is on track or off track. And as a CEO, I can look really quickly and start asking questions based on what's on track or off track. So if you don't already have a tool that you're using for your processes, I'm sure, and if anybody has a favorite tool, please feel free to mention it in the chat. I know others here might be interested in that, but I feel like, what I learned quickly was the more, different documents we put stuff on, the harder it is to find things. So we put it in a system where we can look really quickly and see what's on track and off track. And I love ClickUp. I probably should have invested in them a long time ago, but I have in the business for sure. Okay, next is contracts and renewals. Big part of your business, Gary. You've got kind of a really specific renewal process that you do. So talk about first contract terms, because I know this is, a lot of people have different opinions and views on contract terms, length of contract. Are you flexible on that or not necessarily?
Well, I think our industry's kind of set a standard of 3-year terms for most products.
Mm,
With our new product, our managed services product, it's real important that we get some kind of commitment from the customer, because most of the work for that product is done it's front end loaded.
yeah.
So that for most of the cost is on the front end of it. So let's say you got a 50 employee company that you sell and become their IT person, you're going to spend a lot of hours and time with labor getting them moved over to you. So you got to have some kind of commitment. We hadn't had a whole lot of pushback for the 3-year term.
Yeah.
Now, I am a little bit flexible if the product is our product, but if it's something that I'm reselling, like a fiber circuit, I'm committed to a 3-year term. So unless there's a reason that if that circuit keeps going down, of course I can get out of
Right.
that term. But
Right.
but we have very little problems with customers not wanting to sign terms in
Yeah.
our industry because the industry has kind of set that as a standard.
Yeah. So I would love to know in the chat if you're willing to share your contract link, your standard contract link, put it in the chat. I want to know. I'm kind of curious to hear what others are experiencing. Here on the slide, I just put that every retention focused company knows that renewals are just as critical as sales. It's a lot easier to keep a customer than to go acquire a new one, and cheaper too. So, we want to stay ahead of contract renewal. So talk about how you do that, Gary. How are you staying ahead and making sure that you're getting to the renewal before the customer's out of contract?
Well, we have those client success managers we've talked about,
Yeah.
and they actually have responsibilities for, and we've got them split up between those three, and then they'll get notification starting about 180 days prior to contract, and then they'll start getting really, you know, notification at 90 days to make
Yeah.
sure that they know that it's time to really start working on that renewal. Now, it depends on the type of customer, but we've got several customers with multiple locations. So at times, depending on where they are in their contract, we'll co-terminate contracts with new business,
Yeah.
especially if it's significant new business. We'll
Yeah.
just go ahead and renew the contract for another 3-year term, even if they're only a year to a year and a half in. But most of all, we start looking about 6 months out, knowing what's on the horizon, and then 3 months out, really start with a plan. Those guys have a plan, and we pay them a bonus structure based on they've got certain targets to renew every month, and we pay them a bonus structure based on what they renew every month. Now,
Yeah.
these same people are also adding new products, so
Right.
they've got kind of a hybrid comp plan based on those two things.
So having good visibility to what products the customers have and what they don't. And what are you doing in that 180-day time frame? Like, is there a strategy on, what are we looking at? What's the typical kind of strategic approach at that 180-day mark?
Well, they should be looking at any open or closed, customer support tickets
Yeah.
that are recent or over the life of the customer. Make sure that's been resolved. It gives them a head start to make sure they get some of that stuff resolved. Because sometimes customer call in and they'll say, "Hey, I got a problem with this," but it won't be real important, and it'll just fester at times. And
Yeah.
so I think it's real important to work with our support team to make sure that all of that's resolved. So you're not going in there and say, "Hey, let me resign. Let me sign you up for another 3 years," and you hadn't even looked to see what kind of issues they may or may not have had.
Right.
Hopefully everything's been resolved. And, I think they go in saying, "Hey, I've looked over your, last year and understand you had this problem. It looks like we resolved. Is everything working okay?" But it gives them some talking points other than, "Hey, would you just sign this renewal if you do
Right.
that?" I
Right.
think also it's a good time to see what products they have with us. And so therefore, if they're just a voice customer and don't have internet, revisit what are they doing with internet?
Right.
Why we're the
Right.
better choice, and see if we can get a quote and get some more revenue out of that. Or if they're just an IT services company with us, what are you doing with your voice now? Are you out of contract? Those type things. So
Right.
those are some of the things we do with the renewal process.
So I didn't plan to ask you this, but it just came up. What are your thoughts on auto renew?
Well, I think in our industry it has been abused with the larger carriers, and because of my interest in relationship with the customer and do what's right for the customer, we really don't. I not I can't remember a time where we really enforced it. It
Yeah.
is in our MSAs, but I am counting on those customer
Yeah.
success managers to handle that part and not just auto renew. I
Right.
don't think that that's good for retention.
I was gonna say, I can't think of any customer on the other side that would say, I loved the auto renew. I don't know that anybody would, so that's good.
Now
So,
we have had some customers, that have not wanted to renew, but there are customers they want to go to month, and so we have implemented higher pricing to those
yeah,
customers if they don't want to
absolutely.
wait another 3 years.
Absolutely. Okay, so I guess during that 180-day mark, you said you're resolving issues, probably evaluating profitability, look at what they're using, not using, what services could be added. So what happens if during the contract somebody decides they want to leave. Whether it's, we mentioned very quickly what very early, what the, top, reasons people are leaving. So what happens, in a ETF situation? Are you doing massive early termination fees, or especially with this relational approach? I'd be interested to hear kind of what your thoughts are there.
Yeah, we do protect ourselves with ETFs because you have to, specifically if you're dealing with like a resold product like internet, but
Yeah,
also those acquisition costs tied to that customer with commissions and things like that that you pay on the front end. So you've
right,
got to protect yourself for that. We do look at the reasons they're leaving, and we've had a pretty good rate of you know recouping those ETFs, depending on what the reason is. But unless there's a now, if there's a history of problems and we keep up
right,
with all that, I can sometimes let the ETF go,
right,
because two of the products are our products and we don't have as big a penalty as we would with internet. But
right,
that's unusual that it's our problem. But if it's
right.
our problem, we'll admit it's our problem. We'll let them go. And
Yeah,
I'll
that's good. And I feel like it's always good to part on good terms, because there's always, especially if you're regional MSP, or there are people that are connected to other people in your network and your clients. You don't want to put a bad taste in anybody's mouth if you can help it, right? All right, we
But
got
that's all done at my level, though. I mean, no
right,
one else. I mean, I'm getting recommendation from our CFO and CEO and things like that, but that's
right,
all done at my level. We're size
right,
company where that still needs to be handled by the CEO. Those waivers,
right.
those ETFs.
So we got about 7 minutes left. This is a really important slide. I know Dusty in particular, our one of my friends and a former team member at Fuse.Cloud. He's a big QBR guy. So I don't want to leave this out because it's really important. Give me a thumbs up in the chat if you are implementing quarterly business reviews currently in your business. Thumbs up in the chat. Thumbs down if you don't know what a QBR is, and that's okay. So QBRs, great opportunity to retain clients by using this as a roadmap quarterly for the next quarter. Helps you stay proactive and engaged. I left off an H here on this slide, but with your clients' needs. And in my opinion, and Gary, this is kind of what I feel like a big takeaway is, from your clients as a client, as I am a current client of yours actually, but really taking that vendorship to a partnership where you're quarterly sitting across, and it's, again, sometimes it results in new revenue. A lot of times it does. But the goal is to really, your IT plan, especially for growing businesses, is really important. And making sure that you come alongside them and partner them. So you want to make sure that quarterly business review is something that you're doing, especially with those higher revenue customers. Gary, I don't know if you'll do them with everybody or mainly just those that are IT on the IT side. Dusty probably can provide some insight here. We're getting thumbs up. Good, thumbs up. Got QBRs going on. We want to make sure we're doing them, but we want to make sure we're uncovering in these things that are going to lead to churn. So you want to connect this back to those CSMs, whoever's doing your QBRs, and getting it back to the people who can help resolve the issue. I'm glad that people are doing QBRs. This is a thank you to Dusty on the call. This is a slide that he provided me that just shows what an agenda looks like for their QBR. Gary, you have anything you want to speak to the QBR process and making sure you're on the IT and MSP side? What exactly, what value this has brought you guys?
Well, I'd like you did. I had a lot of credit to Ben, our CEO, and Dusty, our Vice President of Technical Operations, for putting this together. But it's absolutely necessary with the IT product. It's not as needed with the others, even though our
Right,
clients and sales managers are doing that in some format. But when you get into the IT services side, there are so many moving parts. You have to, and it doesn't always have to be quarterly. It could be semi-annually, depends on the size of the customer and what the customer needs and
right,
wants. But it has been a huge help, and they have done a tremendous job of developing this. And it gives another positive touch to the customer.
right,
It's
right,
coming in to say, "Hey, Mr. Customer, let me show you kind of what we have worked out here." It gives you credibility with the customer because it says, "Here are the things we're doing." I had a customer one time that we sold. He actually was my first customer that I sold voice to, and he became our first customer that we sold IT services to 10 years later. And, he called me one day, and he's a small company, and he's got like 8 or 10 people. And he said, "Hey, I know I'm paying you $1,000 a month for this product. I don't know what you do. I never see your
Mm,
people." And
yeah.
I had to say to him,
And
"Well,
that's the point.
because he came from an environment where there was always problems, right?"
Right,
And
right,
I'm saying,
right.
"That's what you're
Yeah,
paying me. That's what you're paying me for." So
yeah,
this allows our team to go in there and say, "Look, here are the things we did. Here are the things we're monitoring. Here are the problems we've had. Here's how we fixed them.
good.
Here are the things that you need to do with your network to stay, current. Here are the things that are end of life. Da 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 da." And
That's good.
so it really, really builds credibility with the customer when you go through this process with them.
Yeah. And especially if you have equipment as a part of your offering, that's certainly an opportunity for some cash as well, but that we want to look at it as that partnership versus vendorship opportunity. So, all right, we just have a couple minutes left. So I want everybody to rate yourself on a 1 to 10 scale. The big six we talked about today at a very high level. Where would you focus first, and then rate yourself? Where would your number one focus need to be if you were to start on the big six tomorrow? Where would you start? I think I saw a couple things throughout the presentation. And if you're willing to, I want to see some stuff in the chat before I move on. I'm forcing everyone to actually put where they rate yourself 1 to 10 and tell us if you were to start on the big six, where would you start to start improving? I love it. All right. And I know we just got a couple minutes. If anyone, I didn't say this at the beginning, but again, Laura Johns, founder and CEO of the Business Growers. Thank you, Gary, for spending some time today. I want to give folks the opportunity to unmute because there probably are questions. And if you need to drop off, I understand. I, again, work with MSPs and IT companies at the Business Growers. Our team does marketing programs specifically to inspire growth and get ROI on your marketing spend. If you're interested in talking to me, you can use that link to book a call. Is anyone want to ask any questions? Gary is here and available for a few more minutes, and we can certainly go a few minutes over if we need to have a leave, Gary, if you've got a minute. Would love to start. Somebody said they'd start with number 1, sales. Somebody would start with process. Grace has just put that link in the chat. So I'm going to stop my screen share right now. go.thebusinessgrowers.com/discovery if you want to call. It's in the chat. Any questions? Questions for Gary with a few more minutes. Everybody's gonna give themselves a 10. Got a 5, start with 1. No questions. Gary, you did great then.
Yeah.
Good job. No questions.
Thanks for including me, Laura.
Yeah, and if you want to learn more about what Gary's doing at Fuse.Cloud, he's on LinkedIn. Gary at Fuse.Cloud is his email address. You can certainly communicate with him that way. He's a great resource. He's hopping around at a lot of industry events, so you can see him at those throughout the year. Thank you, Gary. This was really fun. I think it's never about time to talk about how we can keep clients longer. And so I'm appreciative for you for joining me.
Okay.
Thanks so much.
All right.